Hi class, welcome to week number 2 of Social and Economic Justice 1. This video will go over key concepts from your readings from week number 1. It will also discuss the discussion forum posts for this week and give you a little bit of insight into the readings that you will be doing in week number 2. So your first week was an important overview of an introduction to policymaking structures and the foundations of social welfare policy. So I know that you had a lot of reading this first week, and so I want to just highlight some very key concepts to make sure that you get them because they're important for the foundation as we go forward in the course. So in the Gilbert and Terrell readings, you'll find a lot of information about how social welfare structures are made and kind of how we have come to the social welfare state as they discuss in the text. Gilbert and Terrell discuss the challenges in defining the concepts of social welfare policy, and they provide a list of fundamental social institutions within which the major activities of community life occur. These highlight that society's basic activities are organized within all of these categories, and all of the categories of which provide really important social welfare functions. They are performing things that act or can act for the good of society. So these categories are kinship systems, which are family systems which transmit knowledge, the values, behavioral norms to future generations. They provide the foundation and the very first education for all of citizens, whether that's a positive education or a less than positive education. It is the first education that we receive within the family unit. They also serve as the primary network of social assistance for meeting basic needs. Gilbert and Terrell talk a lot about how families are kind of the front line of providing social support or material support when family members are unable to meet their basic needs. Religious organizations obviously meet spiritual and cultural needs, but they also provide informal as well as highly professionalized social welfare programs to meet people's needs. Religious organizations often blend with civil society, which you'll see in a minute as we get down the list, but religious organizations are one of also the first organizations where people's needs are met. Workplace sites, obviously through economic sustainability, people's income comes from work and also healthcare fringe benefits. Economic markets are places where people's material needs are met through a system of supply and demand and production. The economic market also provides the materials themselves for meeting people's basic needs, where those materials are bought and sold. There's also quite a bit of industry built on helping professions that blends into the economic market or is dependent or feeds into the economic markets. Civil society is a network of non-governmental organizations, self-help organizations, professional helping organizations. These are organizations that do advocacy and as well as fill the gaps where government and private industry do not provide for people's needs. There's obviously also a lot of blending of civil society with all of these other categories. And then finally, government organizations are the formal structures that intend to provide social order as well as meet the minimum basic needs for members of society. So government, especially in our case here in the United States, is responsible for providing the laws and enforcing laws for social order, as well as providing a minimum basic standard of social welfare, which is obviously hotly contested and we'll get further into as we go forward in the course. So all of the social institutions have strengths and weaknesses in their ability to meet human need or serve functions in society. Some aspects of these social institutions are the simultaneous cause and solution to social problems, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward in the course. So it's important to understand that there is a historic and continued debate between perspectives on health. Your text talks about the residual or traditional view of social welfare versus the institutional view. These things can be viewed on a spectrum, but it is important to understand these concepts, and they will be addressed in the coming discussion forums as well. So the residual or traditional view of social welfare looks at social welfare activities or material support as a supplemental activity which is necessary only when normal helping channels fail to provide or meet the needs of people. This type of assistance is viewed as temporary. It's also viewed as undesirable and expendable. When in the residual or traditional view of social welfare, we can think about it more as charity. So when people are unable to meet their needs due to extreme circumstances and they've tried all of the other methods within the other helping institutions or social institutions that we just discussed, then social welfare can step in as a stopgap. The idea is that these are time limited and not permanent forms of assistance. In the institutional view of social welfare, these activities are not kind of time-limited charity necessarily, but they are intended to be an organized frontline function of modern society, a primary means by which individuals, families, and communities fulfill their social needs. In this perspective, you'll see more of the tendency to say that everyone deserves or needs a minimum basic standard of living, and that it is our job as society or government, whose ever responsibility it is, but it's our job to make sure that people have a minimum basic standard of living. And that's kind of where the idea of the welfare state comes in that there's a permanent structure that is available to meet people's needs when they need it. So our approach to these viewpoints depends on our view of, as Gilbert and Terrell discussed, the causes and magnitude of unmet needs in society. As I mentioned before, the spectrum, the discussion of the perspectives of institutional versus residual approaches to social welfare is a spectrum in many ways. And our approach to where we fall on that spectrum depends on where we view the causes of unmet needs in society and how serious they are, how big they are. So our willingness to allocate resources and to what degree depends on where we think problems come from and how far beyond normal social control they are. This also gets into questions about who or what is responsible for a problem and whether or not we view the recipients of the help as deserving or undeserving. You'll also hear the terminology worthy versus unworthy. We'll talk a lot about those concepts as we get into more of the values discussions, because this question about what our view of the causes and magnitude of unmet needs in society has everything to do with the values that underlie our approach to these questions. So this week we're going to start looking more at those ideologies and the social constructions because it's super important for us to be aware of what our own values are and what we personally as practitioners view as the causes and magnitude of unmet needs in society, and how we are approaching the questions about where social problems come from and how we should address them, whether in a more institutional or a more residual way or somewhere in the middle. Related to that is the question of conservative versus progressive. And I say versus even though I do believe that these are also on a spectrum. These are the traditional political perspectives. And again, you will find a spectrum, and I think in current political landscapes, we see that there are much more extreme versions of both of these traditional political perspectives at play. And we can see how these kind of traditional approaches are being taken in many different directions or distorted or expanded on. But it's important for us to understand kind of the traditional approaches to conservative and progressive political concepts. So this table is in your text. It's table 1.2, but I just want to highlight it because it's very important to understand these perspectives as we approach policy and as we think about our role as advocates in the social work field. So you'll see that there are two columns. One is the conservative perspective, the other is the progressive perspective. And then on the far left side, the topic areas will help discuss kind of where those concepts fall on either the conservative or progressive side. So within the conservative perspective, the political ideology is basically individualism. So each person for themselves, each person's success depends on themselves. In the progressive perspective, it is more of a social responsibility. So we are all responsible for one another, or we are responsible for those who are less fortunate. The view of social problems in the conservative perspective is that problems come from bad choices, personal dysfunction, a culture of poverty, a culture of dependence. Those kinds of questions in the conservative perspective are a result of individual choices. Whereas in the progressive perspective, social problems tend to be viewed as a result of socioeconomic difference, barriers to access, lack of opportunity, inequality. A view of the market, so questions of economy and our view of where we sit in a capitalistic society. So the conservative perspective would be that unregulated markets and private property ensure prosperity and welfare for all. So the conservative perspective is that unregulated marketplace allows the economy to flourish and that people can make choices for themselves and also access the wealth that they need to survive and thrive. Whereas the progressive perspective of the marketplace is that unregulated markets also create dangerous economic cycles where things peak and also plummet. They create mass unemployment, urban blight, lead to poverty and inequality, and also environmental degradation. And so you'll see a lot of emphasis in the progressive perspective on regulation to kind of control the market and help prevent people from being used in the advancement of the marketplace. Responsibility of government in the conservative perspective is a residual perspective where government should be small and social welfare should be limited as much as possible within the governmental realm and placed elsewhere outside of the responsibility of government. In the progressive perspective, it's more of an institutional perspective where the government should be large enough to advance social welfare on behalf of the broad community and is held responsible to being able to provide for a minimum basic standard of living for people. And then finally, the social policy agenda in the conservative perspective is that, one second, you're a little too low. You couldn't quite see that, huh? Is a reliance on the economic market, placing a lot of responsibility on charitable organizations to meet people's needs, the religious organizations, provide a minimum safety net focused on the poorest of the poor, or as we discussed just a little bit ago, the worthy or deserving poor. And then in the progressive perspective, there's a reliance on public leadership, an emphasis on a broader social program to meet the needs of all people, even including the undeserving poor. Also providing minimum standards of basic economic security and making sure that all people have access to basic social goods. So Gilbert and Terrell highlight an author who defines welfare more broadly as a collective intervention that aims at meeting individual and societal needs. They list out 3 different types of welfare, which really challenge us to think about how we conceptualize the term welfare. Oftentimes, we vilify the idea of welfare, and I think that in our society and in the media, in kind of the narrative about who receives help and how it's received, the idea of welfare has been kind of maligned. And so looking at welfare more broadly as just any type of collective intervention that meets individual and societal needs can help us think about all of the different ways that government and society intervene to promote people's well-being. And so the three types of this type of broad welfare that are discussed is our fiscal welfare, where we're looking at questions of subsidies from the government, kind of indirect subsidies towards specific groups or specific types of programs, tax deductions, tax credits. So these kinds of things are indirect but specifically benefit certain types of groups. Social welfare would imply the direct expenditures on social programs or material support for individuals and families in need. These are the more visible types of social welfare programs where, actual money is going towards food stamps or child care subsidies or housing programs, any type of the Social Security safety net. All of those things would be considered social welfare, and they're direct expenditures that people can see that it's going towards individuals in financial contributions. Occupational welfare, it's kind of harder to conceptualize, but these are the workplace benefits that correspond with employment, and sometimes those are subsidized by private employers or by tax breaks or other types of reimbursements. But workplace benefits are obviously, they correspond with employment, and so they're only available to people generally who are employed or related to someone who's employed. And so the authors highlight that while social welfare programs are viewed kind of in this negative light sometimes, or this kind of debated light, fiscal and occupational welfare tend to benefit those who already have more resources. So people who are doing tax, they're earning enough to have to file taxes and are eligible for different tax deductions or charitable donations or whatever the case may be. And people who have employment are gaining access to occupational welfare benefits, and we don't view those as the same way. And then finally, questions of regulatory welfare. So social welfare is not just about the allocation of material benefits, as we discussed, fiscal, social, and occupational, but also through governmental regulations aimed at enhancing community well-being. These can be used to promote or enact social welfare policy within budgetary constraints. So sometimes when government or programs do not have enough money to do what needs to be done in order to promote social welfare goals, sometimes regulations can be put in place to require either others to pay for it or laws to change the structure of a situation to promote the well-being of those who are impacted by it. So mandates and regulations can also have unintended consequences, and so as we do advocacy, we always have to consider what the unintended consequences of certain types of regulations are. So who is responsible for bearing the cost? Where will the resources come from? If we take resources from one place in order to regulate a certain area that's problematic, will they be taken from another place? And if so, where would that be? If we're doing regulations that impact private industry or the marketplace, who loses and what will the outcome be? So who is being regulated and why? Are there benefits and costs to that process, and kind of who may or may not be harmed in that process? And then this is also where social regulation can affect private life. So we can consider current social policies where government creates laws or regulations to correct or intervene in social injustice. Also to impact the environment or social norms. Regulatory welfare is one of the most present types of welfare policy in all of our lives. So Gilbert and Terrell also talk about the social market versus the economic market, and we can see a lot of blending and interplay of these markets as we enter the human services field. It's important to note that while government and social market enterprises, so nonprofit organizations, civil society organizations, exist to fulfill certain needs or perform certain types of social control and meet people's basic needs and keep society orderly according to the standards of our society, that the economic marketplace is still at play. And so as we're trying to meet people's needs, there is also a blending of the nonprofit industry and governmental industries or structures with the economic marketplace. And so you'll see a lot of blending in contracting, in the way money is spent, in the role of certain private organizations and profit-based organizations in meeting people's needs. And so Gilbert and Terrell discuss this. And I want to highlight what they say. Inserting profit-oriented agencies into the welfare state and emphasizing the formation of human capital and productivity imbues the social market with the spirit of capitalism and inclines the modus operandi of social welfare allocations toward that of the market economy. So if we allow privatization, so to speak, of governmental roles in helping people meet their basic needs, and traditional religious and nonprofit organizations in also responding to meet people's needs, and we privatize that and bring in huge amounts of money as we do into the industry, the risk is that the capitalistic forces of the capitalist economy that we're a part of will influence the decisions that we make in helping people and meeting their basic needs. And for good or bad, that is also what we see a lot of in funding decisions, in eligibility requirements, in participation requirements for different programs where people need to be able to produce in many ways or participate in a productive way in order to continue receiving help. So finally, Gilbert and Terrell discuss their benefit allocation framework. And this is also going to be important going forward because you're going to use this framework in your future policy analysis papers. So I just want to highlight kind of the main tenets of this framework. They discuss social welfare policies that can be interpreted as choices between what's offered to whom, how it's delivered, and how it's funded. All social policy is about choice and political will. We as a society and our public and political leadership, we're constantly making choices about how we want to spend our resources to help people or not. And so it's important to think about that because as we advocate, we have to help influence people's choices and our leaders' choices to devote energy and resources to addressing certain social policy. And if we view it as a choice, we can understand a little bit more about the different factors that weigh on people's decisions and the choice that they make. So there's 4 important questions that go into the analysis of how we allocate benefits within this framework. So first, what are the bases of social allocations? Who is eligible to receive this support? 2, what are the types of social provisions to be allocated? So what exactly is it that we're giving to the people who are eligible for the support? 3, what are the strategies for the delivery of these provisions? How will this help be enacted? How will it be handed out? How will it be put into effect? And then 4, what are the ways to finance these provisions? So where is the money going to come from? And then each of these 4 questions, dimensions of choice, we have to choose who gets the help, what type of help, how it gets delivered, and how it's going to get financed. Those are going to be examined along 3 additional axes. So for each of those questions, we also need to look at the range of alternatives to these specific allocations. So who is being included, who is not being included? What are the possible options for types of help that could be given to the people who are targeted by this particular social program? 2, what are the social values that are supporting the decisions that are being made about who is receiving help and what type of help it is. Social values are so important in that conversation. And then finally, what are the theories or assumptions that underlie those choices? So if we are looking at policy decisions and we say that, children under 5 should be given access to government-funded early education supports. We believe that education is important for all children, that a universal education is the building block for success in the future, and that the state has a responsibility for ensuring that a basic standard of education is played out. All of those things are values and assumptions and theories that go into the decision to advocate for that certain program. And as we move forward into this week's readings, Gilbert and Terrell set you up for thinking about social justice decisions in the allocation of resources. So if we're talking about equality, we're talking about where everyone gets the same amount equally distributed among all groups. Equity is the idea that everyone gets the same amount as others within their group, and that according to merit, value, or need. Adequacy is the idea that everyone gets a basic standard of what's considered to be a decent minimum threshold. So what's enough? As we move forward into this week's readings, the day readings take these fundamentals of social welfare policy a step further and look at the values that are embedded in U.S. society that lead to our decisions about investments and allocations to social welfare programs. The day chapters also question the motives of social welfare itself as social helping and social control, and our participation as social workers and helping professionals in the perpetuation of social inequality. The readings are pretty challenging and honestly very important for us to be critical and well-informed practitioners. Also, people who are self-reflective about the way we are approaching helping other people and the way we view our role in encouraging others and accompanying them along their journey. This week, you're also going to explore more in-depth concepts of discrimination, prejudice, persecution, patriarchy, paternalism, and how those things influence social welfare decisions. These readings intend to deepen your social justice perspective on social welfare and to start deepening your understanding of the social work role in those issues. The videos also explore these topics and ask strong questions about the values that we hold as a society and how they have shaped and continue to shape policy decisions. A couple of important excerpts from the day readings, and I'm not going to go into them too much because I expect you to read them this week. Social welfare in any society has two major purposes: social treatment, which is helping, and social control. We can easily agree with the helping purpose, but are generally almost unaware of the social control function of our social welfare because it is hidden in ideas about equality and what we consider our right to change our clients. Society needs certain social controls, for some behaviors must be regulated so that interdependent people can live and work together. However, not all such control is positive, and social welfare controls aim at our most vulnerable citizens. Because our clients need our help, they must meet our and society's demands. Seldom do they participate in social welfare decisions that affect their lives, and the price they pay for our help is often their personal freedom. This is a strong challenge to us as we go forward and think about our role as helping professionals and the way we approach people who need assistance. It's also important to think about what our values are, and this directly relates to this week's discussion forum post. So values have 4 identifiable characteristics, and values are not facts. Values are completely subjective. They are conceptual abstractions that are drawn from our immediate experience. So these are lessons that we draw from things that we've experienced and learned along the way. Values are also charged for emotional mobilization. Values get at our emotions and how we want ourselves and others to do something or act based on what it is that we're saying we believe. Values are also the criteria by which our goals are chosen. So when we decide to motivate ourselves for something or support something or take some kind of action, it's usually values that are motivating that decision. And then values are also important. They're not about just like your preferences and the things you enjoy doing or want to do. Values are about what drives you, what informs every decision that you make on a fundamental level. So as we go forward into the discussion forums, you're going to, this week first, be doing a personal values assessment. So you're going to choose and list 3 personal beliefs. You can write these out in complete sentences and list them in bulleted form just to make sure that we're seeing 3 clear statements of personal belief. And these can be anything. The prompt offers examples of different types of values or beliefs, but you know who you are and you know what you believe. So please feel free to develop your own personal belief statements. Based on those 3 belief statements, answer the questions in complete sentences with at least 1 paragraph per question. So first you're going to choose one social problem area, and this can be any type of social problem that's out there, and describe how your values and beliefs would influence the way we in the U.S. address problems in this area. So based on what you believe, how should we as a society address problems in that area? You're going to next identify a social group which might experience the problem that you identified and discuss how you would like to see the needs of those in the group you identified addressed. Be consistent with your values and beliefs. Do you think that their needs should be addressed individually, so with the idea of personal responsibility, or more socially or collectively, where it's everybody's job, social responsibility? Or do you believe that it's somewhere in between, some combination of that, based on what you have said are your personal beliefs? And then finally, would the overall approach in this area be institutional, so applying to everyone universally, or residual? Is it selective or targeted? How? And then please be sure to demonstrate your understanding of these terms of institutional, residual, as I discussed from the Gilbert and Terrell and also this week's reading. And then finally, you're going to read the article by Smedley and Smedley, Race as Biology is Fiction, Racism as a Social Problem is Real, Anthropological and Historical Perspectives on the Social Construction of Race. It is a long title, but not a terribly long article, and very important for us to discuss how we socially construct concepts that guide our understanding of ourselves and others in society. For this post, you will be responding to the post that I posted on the forum site already, and you're going to just post your response there. You are encouraged to respond to other people's posts, but it is not required. Everybody's posts are going to go together in that forum. So you need to respond to this by Sunday this week instead of Thursday. So for your responses, you're going to talk about what are the differences between race and ethnicity according to the authors, and then what is one of the social policy areas to which Smedley and Smedley apply their ideas. And then talk about whether you find their arguments convincing, or if you're moved by them, or annoyed by them, disturbed by them. However it is that you feel about their arguments, please discuss that in your post. I really look forward to seeing how you approach this concept, and especially within our current societal conversation right now, narratives around race and how we're understanding that and how it's playing out in all of our communities. I think that it's very much worth kind of critically thinking about these concepts. If anybody has any questions as we go forward, please don't hesitate to let me know. Have a great week.